representative of an organisation. And that might be my organisation, it might be my employer's organisation, but there would be leeway. And you can see already and probably think to yourself in terms of the ways that you go online and you use the internet that there's an awful lot of bleed between these kind of areas. For some people there isn't. For people that work in my area, who spend all their lives mainly online, there's a massive bleed in terms of these three areas because that's our profession. Really is about managing that and about being like that. But lots and lots of people I speak to, they will say things to me like, Facebook is just for friends and family, nothing else, I don't do anything else there, and then I will use Twitter professionally, or I will use my blog and my website professionally, or some other kind of combination where they will be actively carving up how they represent themselves in those places. So that's kind of one way of looking at it, but also I think it's really important for us always to think holistically about our online presence, and our public online presence is very, very important. And I'll talk about Facebook in a bit because that has a massive impact on how people manage those personal identities at the moment. Okay, so that's one kind of aspect. What is my identity within these situations? This is the other kind of issue, and it's very boring. It's about permissions granularity. It sounds very boring. It's not as boring as it sounds. Okay, permissions granularities is who can see what in any given site. Okay, and it's really, really critical to understand in terms of privacy. It's really, really important. So if we're talking about Twitter as an example of this, in Twitter everybody can see everything or everything is private. There's two levels of granularity there. Everything public, everything private. You can block people if you're public, but they can still see you public. They can still see your public stuff. You've got two levels of permission. So who can see stuff in that instance is everyone or people that I say can. So let's call them friends, for want of a better word. And friends is a good euphemism, I think. It's a good internet euphemism. So everyone, friends. What kind of stuff can they see? In Twitter, it's everything. So everyone can see everything, or everyone that I say can see, or my friends can see everything. That's all the granularity there is. And lots of people say that's why it's a very popular service, because there aren't all of these issues around who can see what can I do, controlling my information. It's much more straightforward in that situation. In Facebook, obviously, it's very, very much more complex than that, because Facebook have put a lot of time and effort into their site granularity. So much so that about, I don't know, it's a while ago now, about 3 years ago, I was speaking at a Facebook conference, and it was just social media people interested in using Facebook for business, or they were all using Facebook and all very familiar with it. And there was about 400 people there, I think, 500 people, and I asked at the beginning of my slot, who in the room feels confident about Facebook permissions? Who knows exactly who can see everything? No doubts. And about 4 people in the room put their hands up. And these are people who are working professionally in these services. So it's not surprising that a lot of people find it very complicated to use Facebook permissions and to kind of feel confident about engaging with them. And the research that came out probably around that period as well showed that most people had a very different understanding of actually who could see their stuff as to actually who could see their stuff. There was a big gap between the reality and how people were thinking that people could see things from them. But Facebook traditionally was a closed social network. It started off not letting any search engine, including Google, index any of its profiles. So you couldn't find somebody's Facebook profile on Google at the beginning. So you might have had 8,000 friends, which would make your privacy slightly different, but it was a closed 8,000 friends that were logged onto the site that you had. this came up quite recently from some research done last year. Actually, I think it's quite a small sample that it came up from. I think they asked, so it's 328 social networking users, which is a really small sample, I think. But they basically asked, they were asking about adults restricting access to areas of their profiles. And what they found what they found that was different from a similar study that they ran about 2-3 years previous to this one, where basically where they're finding was most users didn't do anything to protect their privacy at all. The majority of users weren't bothered about those issues, or if they were bothered, they weren't engaging in them actively to do anything about them. What they found is that 60% of people were restricting access in this group, and I think it's kind of indicative broadly. Restricting access so only your friends can view it again is a very different thing if I've got 5 friends that can only see it, to if I've got 8,000 friends who can only see my profile. There's a very different kind of restriction in play there. And also the limiting who can see your findings. I think there's a massive tension though between social networking service provision, who on the one hand they make money through selling data, through having visible traffic that encourages other people to join in, that encourages people to take part in activity, and then users who typically want some granularity, some control over who sees what elements of their profiles. But the converse issue is that if you make your granularity too complex, people can't use it because they can't be bothered to spend 8 hours working out actually who can see what and everything else. So they'll just abandon it. They won't take time to put all of their contacts into different groups and assign different permissions to their different groups, and then keep those groups updated and add new people in. Some people will, but most users won't. We know most users won't. Okay, so talking about those specific issues around, I'll run through 2 examples very, very quickly then in that case. Okay, one is in images, and there's a whole area around there about consent. People very often take pictures of other people without asking their permission first. They very often post them online. They may well tag those pictures with the names so that they actually are findable without asking for permission to doing that. And there's a huge issue around there, there's a huge social issue that we're not talking about, that we're not having those conversations about, that we're just we're making assumptions about on a daily basis. Pictures of children is really important in this context, I think, in terms of what is your relationship to your children's identities? Is it up to you to be posting pictures of your kids and to be representing them, to be putting public pictures up of them? There's obviously safety issues as well, but there are also kind of issues about their consent issues too and where they are. And we can maybe talk about those later. Friending issues is another area. Back to friending, theme of today, I think. This is some advice that I wrote for the DCSF for the cyberbullying guidance for school staff. This was written in response to a lot of school employees being cyberbullied by students, by other